Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. All right, everyone, we're about to begin. Welcome to the Stoa. I am the steward of the Stoa, Peter Limberg. I run a Stoic group here in Toronto, Canada, and obviously we can't meet due to the situation. So I decided to launch Stoa. So all Stoic groups can meet on this 24/7 Zoom channel, but I'm viewing it more as a digital campfire for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of our moment. And it's not just a group to talk and practice Stoicism, it's a group to talk about what matters most. And I'm averaging about like 3 events a day, and we're just bringing a lot of interesting people, creative people, and we're experimenting with different things. And today, my friend Davood Gozli is going to have a talk, about a 15-20 minute talk on the COVID spectacle. And the spectacle is a term from Guy Debord about how we sort of are pacified through relating with other people through images. And Debord had this as a capitalist critique, but I think it can be repurposed for many different things. But I'll let Davood explain more about that. And after Davood's talk, we're going to have a group dialogue, which I'll explain at that point. So that being said, I'll hand it over to Davood.
Thank you, Peter. So it's okay if I also record?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just to have a history of my mistakes. So thank you very much for being here. I'm very happy to be part of these ongoing meetings. And I'd like to also begin by saying that please don't listen to me as if I'm an expert on this topic. I have no expertise on anything. I've been thinking about these topics for a while, for the past couple of weeks. And part of the reason why I'm sharing them is because I would like your feedback. Because I think these are important ideas. So let me start by sharing the screen if I can. Start share. Yes. I made some slides. Okay. So because I have some background in psychology, again, not expert. So I'm going to start from a psychological point of view. I'm going to start with a basic assumption about life. So what makes something alive? And what makes something alive is, we can call it activity, or we can also divide it and can analyze it into a subject and an object, and the striving of a subject towards an object. So imagine like a bacteria or a worm striving, moving towards food. So that's the basic, the element. Anything less than that is not alive, let alone mental or psychological. So subject, object. But as things get more complicated, we go from a simple movement of a subject towards an object to more things. So we can have, if we assume that this activity is a theme, we can have variations on this theme, more complicated permutations. One of them is the capacity for equifinality. So I can go out of the room through 2 routes, for example, or I can reach my coffee cup with my right hand and my left hand. And both of those achieve the same goal. They both get me to the same object. So 2 paths, 2 means, but common end. Another permutation variation is activity can be accompanied with tools. This is where, instead of a subject-object relationship, so the primary meaningful relationship is between the subject and the second object, object number 2. But there is an intermediary object, which we can say is a tool. So these images are from a primate named Sultan, who was studied by Wolfgang Kohler. He discovered that he can attach, for example, 2 sticks to each other to get a banana, to make a banana fall. So that tool was the intermediate object, which can become an object that aims with the subject together towards the second object. So activity with tools. So we are going somewhere, we are making it more interesting. Now we can have activity with human labor. This is where the intermediary element is not an object anymore. It's not completely, it wouldn't be fair to call it a tool, although we can. But the intermediary element is also a subject. So we have a subject using or somehow through a second subject achieving a goal. So the second object has to go and get the object, and together they are successful with their cooperation. So where does that come from? The Danish psychologist Niels Engelstad said that for something like this to happen, there has to be an event in the history of human development, human evolution. Something that we can metaphorically at least describe with reference to the fall of man story, the story of Adam and Eve. What is the story? We can imagine that this story involved a man who failed at being a hunter, failing to hunt, and would come back to the group hungry and didn't have food. And you can imagine there were some gatherers who were taking care of the children. They had some reproductive surplus resources so that the children could be supported and grow up. And the hunter, you see in this depiction of the fall of man, we see the man looking at the apple, hoping that the woman is gracious enough to give some of the resources to him so he can survive. And if he survives, what happens is that he can go back and hunt again. So the woman can decide to treat the man as like some kind of a child. He's not a child, but he's also not a child, because he can receive support. He can receive some of the surplus resource. Now, what happens is that the moment a person receives investment from another person, they become economically entangled. Now, my friend Peter, Andrew Taggart, people who have also discussed the gift economy. Gift also is a form of entanglement. The moment I receive a gift, I am now entangled with the person who gave me the gift. I'm indebted to them. And it changes the way I see. I relate to my experience and I relate to my own endeavors. I become the second subject in a sense. And if I achieve something, I remember that somebody before in the past invested in me. And I enjoyed their surplus labor, and because of my entanglement, if I become successful, metaphorically, if I hunt and I'm successful, then I will share my results with them. So that metaphor, we can now leave it behind, and we can say, okay, society in general invests in us. Parents invest in us, school, invest in us. They educate us, media, anything that we receive while growing up, by developing, forming into an adult human being, is that formation, that investment of societies is part of that. And because of that investment, because of that education, the process of education, we inherit aspects of the dominant order. So what does that mean? It means that there are dominant ways that are common, the status quo, the dominant ways of organizing individual behavior and collective behavior. There are dominant ways of organizing ourselves when we are alone, and organizing collectively when we are together, when we are cooperating together. And one example would be organizing together in a hierarchy, in the form of a hierarchy. And we can learn how to do that well. And these involve not just activity, not just doing things, but also believing things. So these inherited beliefs and engagements perpetuate. This is the assumption now. We're getting close to the logic of the spectacle. Why we have beliefs that are not necessarily good for us. Because one of the functions of these beliefs and engagements is to perpetuate those existing modes of organization that in the first place invested in us. So they invested in us so that we continue to act in ways that would perpetuate the ways of behaving and organizing. So if we have been invested in by a society that has as an aspect of it mass production, a logic of markets, then we will continue to make choices that will perpetuate those values. So the fall of man, the concept of the fall of man, is related directly to other ideas, themes in, for example, Heideggerian philosophy. Heidegger talks about the Dasman, the other people, the they. When we think about, for example, what they say, if I make this decision, what are people going to say? What are they going to judge? How are they going to judge me if I go on this path, for example? This is where we don't think just from where we stand, but we also put ourselves in a position of the rest of society and how we look from their perspective. More famous perhaps is the allegory of the cave. We inherit these ways of translating appearances and what something means in our society, what something means in our culture, and not just doing things, but acquiring signs of being on the right track, doing the right thing, that we appear as if we are in a good position, having good status. Okay, now that long introduction, which is basically the biggest part of my presentation, I just wanted to open up the space for understanding and appreciating the fact that something like the spectacle and the way we relate to spectacles and the way we become spectators, how that comes about, and what it is, what are its origins. The origins are investments, education, early education, and our interactions with other people. So this is now the main Gita board source. What is the spectacle? Spectacle is something that captures our attention. It entertains us, it gets rid of our boredom, and it unites us. It gives us a sense of being together, that we are together. Why are we together? Because we are all paying attention to the spectacle. So even if something terrible happens in the news and we all hear about it, and we have nothing else to do but pay attention to it and comment on it, that itself gives us a sense of, gives us the ability to forget our individual here and now and join each other in paying attention to the spectacle. Another thing that it does is that it prioritizes appearance over reality. It becomes more important to look right, to appear right, to look good, so to speak, than to actually be good. So appearance is prioritized over reality. There's this line in the book that says, to be good, according to the logic of the spectacle, to be good is to appear, and to appear is to be good. And we can derive from that circular relationship, we can derive the conclusion that to be famous is inherently good. Why? Because if you are famous, you appear in the minds and eyes of many, many people. Therefore, your appearance is expanded. Therefore, you are better. You are more worthy, according to the logic of the spectacle. It also prioritizes appearance over action. It prioritizes observing things over participating in things. So when we think about something, an event like a pandemic like the spread of COVID-19, if we think about it as a spectacle, we automatically, because we have been trained to identify and to treat something as a spectacle, that relationship becomes a relationship between us and something that is way far, that it's not really about me. It's not really about us. It's something that is at a distance. It's not personally relevant to me. And I can make the best of it and make my own choices in a way that really is not essentially related to the nature of the COVID situation. So here we have a person who is celebrating his daily run, the daily jog, which I don't judge at all. It's good to stay healthy. But this is not a response that empathizes with us as a collective. Okay, the spectacle isn't about us. It has no place for a reply. Imagine, like, if I meet a superstar in any field, uh, after a really big event, a big lecture that they give, that person doesn't really have time to answer everybody's question. The spectacle doesn't have, if somebody becomes a spectacle, they don't have time to respond to all comments, to all questions. This is what it means when we read, the spectacle doesn't have a place for conversation or for reply. The only place that it affords, the only place that it gives us, the only position that it gives us is a position of an observer, passive observer. Okay, this is another one. I think, and you might disagree with me, but I think this is another response that we can categorize as more or less a spectator's position on COVID-19. Taxes filed, unemployment filed, social distancing in order, interviews locked in. And then later he replies to himself, oh, and finally got into Love is Blind. I don't know what that is. I assume it's a Netflix show, but okay. Just examples. I'm worse than all of these examples, I'm sure. I've done worse things. So again, to emphasize, appearance is prioritized over reality. So the questions that we can ask, and I think this is what I want to keep in my mind and encourage us to talk about more. The question is this: how are we paying attention to an event like COVID-19? Am I paying attention to it? What kind of attention am I giving it? Am I giving it a kind of attention that leads to action, that leads to participation, that brings out the reality of the situation? Or am I giving it a kind of attention that promotes further passivity, further observation, and further like just sitting in front of my computer and keeping track of the stats, which I'm sure all of us do occasionally, but if that shouldn't be the only thing we do. Okay, my last point, this is a colleague of mine. I should probably share it with him too. So I'm gonna read it. He says, guys, please stop bragging about your academic productivity during this time. Many are juggling kids, home, family, abroad, who are at risk, lonely at home, members of a high-risk group, worried about future, etc. Have some freaking compassion. This ain't a writing retreat. It's good, you know, but it is good in appearance. I mean, this can be, I'm sure, the intentions behind the tweet are good and pure. But again, if we follow the logic of the spectacle, we can fall into a trap of, by just saying the right thing, by just looking good in amongst the chaos and the confusion and stress. If I just say the right thing and appear to be fair and compassionate, that's enough. I don't have to do anything anymore. I just say the right thing. And I think I just flagged this as a potential trap. Okay. These are my sources. In addition to the book, I also relied on the Danish psychologist Niels Engelstedt, Catching Up with Aristotle, which it's an important book about psychology if you're interested. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll pass it back to Peter.
Cool. All right, so let's stop recording because we'll pivot to the group.